Hi everyone. As we start today's message, I'd like you to turn with me to the book of John. We're going to read John chapter 1 from verses 1 to 14. John chapter 1 from verses 1 to verse 14. The Bible says, and speaking of Jesus, it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made." Verse 4, "In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not." Verse 6, "There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. The same came for a witness to bear witness to the light, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light." Verse 9, "That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not." Verse 11, "He came unto his own, and his own received him not." Verse 12, "But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God." And verse 14 says, "And the Word was made flesh, and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth." In 2013, I visited the United States of America for the first time. And I was there for a conference, and then I traveled a little bit. I was there for an academic conference. I'd written a paper for a conference, and as a result, I was allowed to, or I was given the opportunity to go and present that paper at the conference in the U.S. And fortunately, the university that I was studying at the time paid for that trip. So I was there for the conference, but I also traveled around a bit. And after about 2 weeks of traveling, I was quite impressed by the transportation system in the United States. I had been traveling from place to place using the public transport systems, and I was really impressed. And so after 2 weeks, I found myself in Los Angeles, and I had booked myself a rental car at a place called Long Beach Airport, which was about 50 kilometers or 30 miles away from where I was staying in Los Angeles. And I didn't know exactly how I was going to get there. So I was staying in a hotel up the road from Union Station, which is a train station in Los Angeles. And like I said, I was already impressed by the public transport system. So I knew that even though I didn't know how to get there at that time, I knew that it certainly was possible to get from Los Angeles, from Union Station to Long Beach Airport, 50 kilometers away. But that day particularly, I would be more impressed than I had ever been before. I arrived at Union Station, so I was staying at a hotel up the road from Union Station, walked to Union Station, and I got there at around 7:30 in the morning. And I found that there were these phones at the station that you could phone. You can get in touch with an operator, and they would help you or give you directions as to how to get from Union Station or from where you were to anywhere in the city or in the state, perhaps even in the country. So I got on one of those phones, and I told the operator, "Look, I'm here at Union Station, and I would like to get to Long Beach Airport, 50 miles or 50 kilometers, 30 miles away." And this is what the operator said to me. She said to me, "Take the red line at 7:45 and get off at 7th Street at 7:50. Get off at 7th Street at 7:50 a.m. Then she said, "Take the blue line going south at 7:55. Get off at Willow Street Station at 8:35. She then said, "There's a bus called Long Beach." So she said, walk to Willow Street, take the Long Beach bus 102. It arrives at East on Willow at 9:05 a.m. And then she says, get off at Long Beach Airport at 9:25. So all these intricate details, this intricate plan she gave me now, and I was able to follow these details and arrive at my destination. And like I said, I was more impressed by the United States transportation system than I had ever been before. I followed this plan and I was able to get to my destination at the exact time that the operator said that I would. The Bible also tells us about an intricate plan, the plan of salvation, this plan to eradicate sin from the universe. And Revelation chapter 12 tells us that, long before you and I were born, long before you and I were ever entered the scene of history, long before even the earth was created, there was this war in heaven. Satan decided that God was unfair, God was unjust, and God's laws were arbitrary, and he decided that he was going to attack the kingdom of God or the government of God. He decided that he deserved a higher place in heaven than he had been given, and so he rebelled against God, and he instilled in many of the angels this dissatisfaction for heaven. He instilled in his angels a doubt as to God's righteousness, as to God's fairness, God's love, and as a result of that, a third of the angels followed Satan in this rebellion against God, and eventually this rebellion came to earth when Eve was tempted by Satan to take that fruit and eat that fruit, and as a result of her eating that fruit, sin entered the earth. And because of sin entering the earth, now we see all this gloom and doom, all this evil, this destruction, this hurt, this pain, this suffering that we find on earth. It was a result of this rebellion that took place in heaven and eventually found itself being manifested here on earth as well. And so sin was born and all these bad things came into the earth. But when sin originated, as soon as sin originated, God put into effect his plan to eradicate sin. The purpose of God's plan was to demonstrate that God is love, that his laws are fair, that his government is righteous, that everything that he puts in place is for our benefit and for our good, and that there is nothing that God holds from us that would be for our benefit or would be for our good. So when sin originated on earth, God put in place this intricate plan of his. In the same way that operator gave me this intricate plan to get from one place to another, God put in place his intricate plan to eradicate the sin that had entered the world. And we know that because God put this plan into place, we know that we will arrive at our final destination of finally eradicating sin from the universe. And so in this message, I'd like to discuss with you three important parts of this plan. And I believe that if we understand these three important parts of this plan, it'll give us confidence to participate in this plan. It'll give us confidence in God's ability to deal with this sin problem, and it'll also get us to the point where we can be saved at last, and not be like it said in the Bible, like those people who say the harvest is past, the summer is ended, and yet we are not saved. I believe that if we understand these three important parts of this plan, we will not be like that. We will eventually be saved, and sin will eventually be eradicated from the universe. So point number one of God's intricate plan, I believe that God's plan was not an afterthought. I believe that God's plan was not an afterthought. And just to summarize this, this message or this series of messages has the overall theme of focusing on Christ. And so when we consider the plan not being an afterthought, we should have in mind this idea of Jesus, the eternal Son of God. Jesus, the eternal Son of God. The plan was not an afterthought. Jesus, the eternal Son of God. That is point number one. What do I mean when I say afterthought? Well, last year in November actually, we had a birthday party for my wife, Hannah. And while we were having this birthday party, we had it in a park. She enjoys the outdoors. So we had this birthday party in a park. We had some friends. It wasn't a big thing, very small thing, just a few friends. We had blankets laid out there in the park, blankets to sit on. We had a table out there. We had some food to eat, something to drink. We had a birthday cake as well. And while we were having this get together, this little birthday party, it started to rain. The weather took a bit of a turn for the worse. We started to see the clouds come a little bit gloomy. And so while this was happening, while we saw this weather turning, taking this turn, we thought to ourselves, it's going to be raining soon, and perhaps we need to make a plan. And so, as it started to rain, as it started to drizzle, we packed up everything. We put everything into the few cars that we had available there. And I called my mom and I said, "Look, it's starting to rain here. And we were having a bit of a get together in the park for Hannah's birthday, and we'd like to come over to your house, and have the rest of the party there." My mom agreed. We went over and we had the rest of the party over there. So obviously, this was a mini solution, or a solution to a crisis that we were facing in the moment. We hadn't planned that it was going to rain. We didn't know that it was going to rain. This happened without us knowing it was going to happen. And so because this problem was an unforeseen problem, the solution to that problem was not a very elegant solution. Okay, but now suppose we had prepared an elegant solution. Right? Suppose we had known that it was going to rain at exactly 2 p.m. and then decided that we were going to have the party in 2 venues. Let's say we decided that we were going to have something to eat. We were going to perhaps sing happy birthday, maybe have something to drink as well. And then at just before 2 p.m. we had arranged for some cars to arrive. And then we would get into the cars, pack everything into the cars, and then move everything to my mom's house. And suppose that because we knew it was going to rain, suppose the day before we had even prepared my mom's house for this party. Suppose we had put up decorations, we had prepared the dining table, we had put out plates and cups and knives and forks, and we had put the seats in beautiful places. Suppose we had prepared everything for this party. Instead of having a non-elegant solution, where things weren't prepared and we arrive there and it's a bit of a mess and we don't know what to do, suppose we had put together this elegant solution. Then instead of having an unplanned situation or a non-elegant solution, we would end up having a beautiful party in two venues, a beautiful 2-venue birthday party. And this is more like the plan of salvation. The plan of salvation was not an afterthought. It didn't, with our party, this second solution, the solution to this crisis was an afterthought. First the problem happened, and then we decided on a possible solution, which was not very elegant. But the plan of salvation was not an afterthought. It was rather an elegantly crafted solution to deal with a foreseen problem. The Bible tells us that the plan of salvation was not an afterthought. It was not damage control. God knew long before we were even created that sin would eventually arrive in His universe, and He put together a plan to deal with this very effectively. It was not a quick solution. It was not like I said, it was not an afterthought. It wasn't pulling a few strings together, see what we can do kind of thing. But rather it was an intricate plan that He put together long before we even existed. Romans 16 verse 25 says, "Now to Him that is able to establish you according to my gospel, and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery which hath been kept in silence through times eternal." Matthew 13 verse 35, "So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophets, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things hidden since the foundation of the world." 1 Corinthians 2 verse 7 says, "No, we speak of the mysterious and hidden wisdom of God, which He destined for our glory before time began." Ephesians 3 verse 9 says, "And to illuminate for everyone the stewardship of this mystery, which for ages past was hidden in God, who created all things." Colossians 1 verse 26 says, "The mystery that was hidden for ages and generations, but is now revealed to His saints." So the Bible tells us about this mystery, this plan that was hidden for all eternity, that nobody knew about what was going to happen, but God knew that when sin arrives in this world, when sin arrives on planet Earth, I will put into place this plan that I have been keeping secret from the foundation of the world. And I believe that the greatest testament that this plan was not an afterthought is in the very name Son of God, the very name that is given to Jesus, Son of God. One of the most well-known passages in the Bible is John chapter 3 verse 16. It says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believed in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." But very few of us know what it means, what the Bible means when it says only begotten Son. What does it mean that Jesus was the only begotten Son of God? What does it mean to be the Son of God? Does that mean that Jesus had a mother? Does that mean that Jesus somehow was birthed from God, that somehow he came from God? You know, in our understanding of things here on earth, we have this idea called a metaphor. And a metaphor is something that describes it's a method of describing something that helps us to understand some characteristics of that thing. So for example, if I had to say, I flew to work in my car. If I say I flew to work in my car, I don't actually mean that I flew to work in my car. But what I really might be meaning is that I got there very quickly. I don't mean to say that my car has wings or that it lifted off the tar road. But what I mean is that it went there very fast. Now there's the reality, and then there's the metaphor. The reality is an airplane. Okay, I'm taking some things from the reality of an airplane which flies, and I'm applying that to my car. I'm saying that my car flew, but I don't mean that it actually lifted up from the ground like a airplane does. But I mean that it goes very fast. It goes as fast as, well, not even as fast, but that it goes very fast, like an airplane goes very fast. So there's the reality, the airplane, and then there is the metaphor, me taking some of the things that describe an airplane, applying that to my car or to the situation, and saying that this is what happened. And it's very important for us to distinguish between the reality and the metaphor. Now, in our language, the word son is a metaphor, I believe, for a real thing that exists in heaven. In our terms, the word son applies to a biological relationship between perhaps a father and his child. We mean that this child came from the union between a husband and his wife and was birthed by the wife. Now that is what it means in our language to be a son. It means to be born of a woman. But I believe that to be a metaphor of something more real that happens in heaven, or that is understood in heaven. I believe that in heaven the word son means something completely different. Psalm chapter 2 verse 7 says, "I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And this is God speaking about Jesus. He says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And the question we need to ask is, when did this conversation take place? When did God say to Jesus, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee"? Hebrews 1 verse 5 says, "For unto which of the angels said he at any time, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee? And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son." And I'd like you especially to take note of the tense in this verse. It says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. And again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son." So, if we just take a step back, it wasn't always the case where Jesus was the Son of God. It was not always the case where God was the Father of Jesus, because this verse clearly says that I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And when we take that back to Psalm 2 verse 7, it says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." So there was a certain time where Jesus became the Son of God, even though he was called the Son of God way back into eternity. Acts chapter 13 verse 30 to 33 says, "But God raised him," that's raising Jesus, "from the dead," verse 31, "and he was seen many days of them which came up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem, who are witnesses unto the people, and we declare unto you glad tidings, how that the promise which was made unto the fathers," verse 33, "God hath fulfilled the same unto us their children, in that he raised up Jesus again, as it is also written in the second Psalm, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And so we see that Paul speaking here quotes from Psalms chapter 2. He says, from the second Psalm. It says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And he is equating this with Jesus being raised from the dead. He says that God has fulfilled his promise to us in Jesus being raised from the dead. And he's saying that, and this was prophesied in Psalm chapter 2, where it says, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee." And so we see, where does this conversation take place? Where did God say to Jesus? Where did the Father say to Jesus, "Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee"? It's clearly at the resurrection. So when Jesus was resurrected from the dead, he became the Son of God. God became his Father. And so there's this connection between being a son and being raised from the dead. We see this connection as well in Hebrews chapter 11, when the faith of Abraham is described. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 17 to 19 says, "By faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac. And he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up, even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure." Now we know that Isaac was not the only son of Abraham. Abraham had also another son, Ishmael, who we had from Sarah's maid a few years before Isaac was even born. But it says that Abraham offered up his only begotten son. Why is he the only begotten son? Because of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And it says that he accounted that God was able to raise him up from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. So in two ways, Abraham received Isaac from the dead. In the first way was that Isaac had been very old and he thought that he would never get a son. And so in one sense, he received Isaac from the dead because it was almost as if he was not able to have kids. And then in a second sense, he received Isaac from the dead because, God had said to him, "Go sacrifice your son Isaac." And he thought to himself that, God would be able to raise him up from the dead. And so when God told Isaac, told Abraham, don't lay your hand on the boy, it's fine, I have tested your faith now. It was also almost as if Isaac was being received by Abraham from the dead. And so we see that in the Bible, we see that with Jesus and with Abraham and Isaac, there is this connection between the name son or only begotten son and being raised from the dead. And so, we could sort of bring this to our level and say, in heaven, being a son means to be raised from the dead. In our sense, we use a metaphor, and so not all things of the metaphor apply, of course. Just like my car doesn't lift off from the ground when I say it flies. In fact, it does other things that an airplane does not do. It can drive at certain speeds. I can turn very left and right very, very easily. It's more agile. So there's certain things about my car that the plane does not have. But there are definitely things that I'm describing my car to have that are only in the airplane. Like when I'm saying my car flew, I'm saying that it drives very fast, but I'm not saying that it flies like the car. And in the same sense as well, Son of God in heaven's terms means to be born or means to be raised from the dead. And in our terms, our understanding here on heaven, here on earth, it means to be born of a woman. There are certain things that are similar. We could say that my child never existed before, but now they exist. That sort of is like being raised from the dead. But it's not exactly the same as the reality that exists in heaven of this idea of son meaning being raised from the dead. And so when the Bible refers to Jesus as the Son of God or the only begotten Son of God, it has nothing to do with Jesus' origin. Jesus had always been with God from the beginning or for throughout eternity. So it has nothing to do with Jesus' origin, as if he had a mother. But rather that one day Jesus would die and be raised from the dead in order to defeat this enemy, this great enemy called sin. So the name Son of God has to do with the foreknowledge of God. In other words, God knew long before we even existed that sin would arrive on this planet and that Jesus would have to die and be raised from the dead. And therefore he attributed this name Son of God to Jesus through time eternal because he knew that this would happen. So for as long as there has been a God, for as long as there has been God, which is eternity, there has been the solution to the sin problem. Jesus has forever been called the Son of God. Why? Because God always knew that sin would arrive on earth and that he would have to put in place this intricate solution, this intricate plan to eradicate sin from the universe, and that would involve Jesus dying and being raised from the dead. And this truly was the mystery that was hidden for ages past and for generations, but has now been revealed to us, to his saints, says Paul. The plan of salvation was not an afterthought. It was a foreordained solution to the universe's greatest threat, and was prophesied in the very name Son of God. So, we could ask the question then, why was it such a great act of love for God to give us his only begotten Son? Previously we might have thought of, when it says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, we might have thought that, it's very difficult for a father or a mother to give up their son, So we might have had that concept of God as giving up a son that was born from him. But we know this is not true. We know that Jesus was not born of God, but that he always existed. So why was it an act of love? Of course, it is very difficult. It would be very difficult for a father or a mother to give up their child. But that's not exactly the same sense that God gave up Jesus, his son. Because Jesus was not born of God, he had always been called the eternal Son of God. And this was a foreknowledge that he would be, that he would die, that he would be raised from the dead. So why was this a great act of love? Firstly, because for one moment in eternity, there was this separation between members of the Godhead that had never been there before. There was this separation. The Godhead, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit had always been together. Beings that had been in close community forever suffered the greatest separation possible. And secondly, God also now had to suffer this pain and gloom of this sinful world, and he had to be tortured and killed by beings that he had created, which he had the power to destroy. Just in saying a word, God could destroy us, but now he decided that he was going to put himself in a position where he was going to be destroyed, where he was going to be killed by his creation. And thirdly, Jesus, the second member of the Godhead, will forever carry the scars of this sinful world, and he will never realize his former glory. So in these three ways, it was a tremendous act of love for God to give us Jesus, who would come, die for our sins, and be raised again from the dead. The plan of salvation was not an afterthought. God so loved the world that he deployed the solution to the sin problem, despite the pain and the permanent damage to himself as a result of going through with this plan. It was not an afterthought, but a complete solution to a problem that existed long before you and I even came into existence. So number one, this plan was not an afterthought. Jesus was always the eternal Son of God. Point number two, the plan involves Jesus coming to live with us. Jesus, the friend of sinners. The plan involves Jesus coming to live with us, and so we call Jesus the friend of sinners. When I was younger, we had a dog. Our family had a dog, a little Maltese poodle. And this Maltese poodle, we called Snuggles. And Snuggles used to live in the house with us. He would go outside sometimes, or as often as he needed to. But he would live in the house with us. He slept with us in our beds. He sat with us on the couch. And so it was important for us to keep him clean. So once a week, every Sunday, my siblings and I would take turns to wash Snuggles, to give him a complete wash, and then also at the end of the wash, also blow dry his hair to make sure that he was completely dry and that he wouldn't try to dry himself on the couch, on the carpet, or perhaps even go outside and try to dry himself in the dirt. And sometimes when it was my turn to wash Snuggles, I would put him on the washing machine. And that's where I would blow dry his hair. And then what I would sometimes do is I would call on him to jump off the washing machine. The washing machine was reasonably high, and I would tell him, jump off. I'd call him, Snuggles, come, jump off. And he'd always be a little bit hesitant, a little bit afraid to jump off. He seemed very scared. It was very high. He didn't know what was going to happen. So he was always very scared to jump off the washing machine. And so one day I decided to get on top of the washing machine myself and then jump off. So I did that. I got on the washing machine, I jumped off, and I called to him and I said, hey, come, jump off, come. And this day, because I had, done this, Snuggles actually jumped off the washing machine and he didn't get hurt, of course. But it was just interesting to see that after I had demonstrated to him that it was possible to jump off the washing machine, that he too could jump off the washing machine. So he got motivation, he got more encouragement, and he probably felt less fearless to jump off. He probably felt less fearful to jump off the washing machine. You see, the plan of salvation required something similar. It required God to come where we are, to live like we live, and to set an example of what is required for us, and to encourage us to do the same. John tells us, as we read in the verse in the beginning, in this passage in the beginning, John tells us that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It says he came unto his own. And in the Old Testament there had been many demonstrations of God's desire to be close to us and to come down to where we are. And not only that, he demonstrated his willingness to veil his glory and to take upon himself a humble form in order that he may be close to us, in order to break down any barrier between us and him, so that we may have free access to him and regard him as a friend with the desire to help us out of the hole that we have dug ourselves into. We see this in the burning bush when Moses was called to God, to the burning bush. God not only demonstrated his power through this burning bush, but he chose a bush. He could have chosen some magnificent plant, but he chose a bush. So he demonstrated his power, but at the same time veiled that power enough for Moses to commune with God as a friend talks to a friend. God also revealed himself in a cloud of fire, in a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, when he delivered the Israelites from Egypt. When he called them out of Egypt, he led them through the wilderness and he covered them. He provided shade to them by day and light and warmth at night. So enough glory for us to see his power, for them to see his power, but with enough veiling of that power so that they would not be destroyed. He gave them all the things that they required, all the things that they needed to go through that wilderness experience. Shade by day, warmth and light at night. God demonstrated that he desired to fulfill our needs and give us what we need, providing for our needs. And then also in Moses, when God instructed Moses to build a sanctuary, he said to him, "Let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them." He said, "I want to be close to them. I want to be their friend. I want to dwell where they dwell. I want to pitch my tent next to them." And so he pitched his tent next to us, to be close to us, to be our friend. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And so when Jesus became a man, he came down to this earth, veiled his glory in a human body, and became human like us. And he became our friend. He suffered with us. He ate like we did. He suffered the pains and struggles that we face. And he just became friends with us. So Jesus the eternal, or Jesus the friend of sinners. Not only did he come to live where we live, but he also experienced temptation like we experienced temptation. Hebrews 2 verse 17 to 18 says, "Wherefore in all things it behooved him to make like unto his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make reconciliation for the sins of the people." Verse 18, for in that he himself had suffered, being tempted, he is able to succor or to help them that are tempted. Hebrews 4 verse 15 says, "For we have not a high priest which cannot be tempted, or which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin." Jesus was tempted to do wrong with the knowledge of past failures. Let me ask you this: have you ever been in a situation where you were tempted to do wrong with the knowledge of your past failures? Have you ever been tempted to do something, and when you arrive at this temptation, you know that previously I had fallen in this temptation, previously I have experienced this temptation and fallen into that temptation and actually committed this sin. And very often when we are in a situation like this or like that, the knowledge of the fact that we have failed before makes it harder for us to resist this temptation. And so in Jesus' case, the Bible tells us that he experienced temptation like we experience temptation. It says he was tempted in all points like as we are tempted. And so in the same way that we are tempted sometimes with the knowledge that we had previously failed, Jesus was also tempted with that knowledge, or with that feeling of guilt that he had previously failed. Now Jesus himself did not sin. Jesus was not a sinner like we are sinners. He himself did not sin. But Isaiah chapter 53 tells us that God laid upon him the iniquity or the guilt of us all. And so when Jesus was tempted, he had on him the weight of our guilt, and he himself did not fall, but he had the guilt of a person who had previously fallen, and he had to face temptations with that same guilt and with that same feelings of those past failures, just like we experience temptations. So Jesus came to be tempted just like we are tempted. He came to experience the struggles of life just like we experience the struggles of life. And the reason he did this, the reason why he was tempted even with experiencing the same guilt that we experience, he did this so that he could know what it feels like, and so that he could also help us in the times where we face temptation. Jesus was tempted with the same guilt that we have when tempted, and yet he did not sin. Why? So that he can help us when we are tempted, and so that we can overcome temptation when we face temptation. And so Jesus knows what we're going through. And so point number 2, this plan involved Jesus coming to live with us. So Jesus is the friend of sinners. Jesus knows what we are going through. He is tempted like we are tempted, and therefore he's able to help us when we are tempted. There is now no longer this gap between us and God. God became man in the form of Jesus Christ. He lived with us, lived where we live, to experience our struggles. And so we know that God is intimately acquainted with our experience, and he knows what we are going through. And therefore he's able to help us with the struggles that we are going through. And this was a very important part of the plan of salvation. And because of this, we know that it is more effective. Point number 3, the plan puts man and earth in close connection with God. The plan puts man and earth in close connection with God. Jesus, the eternal God-man. Jesus, the eternal God-man. There is a word in Japanese called kintsugi. Kintsugi. And this word means golden repair or golden joinery. Golden joinery or kintsugi is the centuries-old Japanese art of fixing broken pottery with a special lacquer dusted with powdered gold, or silver or platinum. Beautiful seams of gold glint in the cracks of ceramic ware, giving a unique appearance to the piece. This repair method celebrates each artifact's unique history by emphasizing its fractures and breaks instead of hiding or disguising them. Kintsugi often makes the repaired piece even more beautiful than the original, revitalizing it with new life. So there is this Japanese art of, when you have a piece of pottery, a bowl or a jar that breaks, there's a method of putting this back together using powdered gold, using this sort of epoxy or this glue that is dusted with gold, so that in the end you have this beautiful piece of pottery with all these lines of gold, where cracks used to be. And this method of rejoining a broken piece of pottery actually makes this piece of pottery more valuable than it previously was. And so we see the same thing happen in the plan of salvation. Because of what has happened here on earth, because of the plan of salvation taking place here on earth, because of sin having happened and God providing a solution to the sin problem, we are now in a closer connection with God than we would have been had this never happened. And we see this in several ways. Firstly, we see that Jesus will forever have this human form that he had when he came to earth. Acts 1 verse 11 says, "Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus which is taken up from you into heaven shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven." Paul says many years after Jesus has ascended into heaven, he says in 1 Timothy 2 verse 5, "For there is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Jesus Christ." So Jesus will forever have this human form. Of course, having gone to heaven, he has a more glorified human body, but he no longer has that form of glory that he had before coming to earth. He forever has this human body. Jesus forever bears the scars. After Jesus was raised from the dead, doubting Thomas put his hands into Jesus' side and into Jesus' scars on his hands, or into Jesus' wounds on his hands, which had not yet completely healed. And so when Jesus goes to heaven, he has these scars, and forever he will have these scars. So through eternal ages, when people ask Jesus, what happened to your hand, he will always be able to recount to them the story of salvation, as to how he became a man here on earth and died for our sins and was resurrected. So although he has a glorified body, an immortal body, he has a human body. And so we ever share this intimate bond, this intimate connection between us and God, because he has taken on a human form. Truly, he is our elder brother. And when he comes back, the Bible says that, beloved, now we are the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be. But we know that when he shall appear, we shall be like him. So we will also receive these glorious bodies, but nonetheless they will be immortal. They will be human bodies, though they are immortal, though they are without the infirmities of that we had faced here on earth. They will be still human bodies. And secondly, this earth will be glorified as the place where the whole thing went down. The place where this whole plan of salvation happened. When the place where God became a man, the place where the King of the universe lived, suffered, died, and rose again. Revelation 21 verse 1-3 says, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God, out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." Verse 3, "And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself shall be with them, and be their God." And so there is this exaltation of the earth, or this glorification of this earth, this lifting up this earth from the state of insignificance to a state of glory, where this becomes, this everybody in the entire universe that knows, hey, this is earth, this is where everything happened. And because of that, we also share this intimate connection between ourselves and God. Nelson Mandela is considered one of the great heroes of history. And the reason he is considered one of the great heroes of history is because for the sake of his people, for the sake of getting rid of segregation between white and non-white South Africans, for the sake of getting rid of oppression in the country of South Africa, Nelson Mandela went to prison on an island called Robben Island. Robben Island is an island off the coast of South Africa, where political prisoners for many years, for centuries, had been sent to in isolation from the country of South Africa. And things there were not very, obviously, in being a prison, things weren't very good over there. Bad weather. The food that they were given wasn't very pleasant. They were often put on starvation diets. They were forced to work in mine quarries, or in lime quarries, with this reflection onto their eyes. In fact, Nelson Mandela, having worked, or having been in prison at Robben Island for the rest of his life, had issues with his eyes because he worked in that lime quarry. But Nelson Mandela had served 18 years of his 27 years of imprisonment. He spent that at Robben Island, and he lived a rough life there. But now, after having freed or relieved the country of the segregation, having ended the apartheid era, and having removed the oppression being faced in the country, this place, Robben Island, has now become a tourist destination. And so people are able to go there and to see, how things were like for the prisoners back there. And so a place that had previously been a prison, a place that had previously been this quarantined off area of the country, has now become this glorified tourist destination. And in the same way, Earth will become that glorified tourist destination eventually when God completes this plan of salvation. I once saw a video called The Pale Blue Dot, and this was Carl Sagan speaking about the mission, I think it was the Voyager mission, of how they sent this spacecraft out from Earth, and they just sent it flying off into the far edges of the universe, just letting it completely go. And he said that it's in this video, the pale blue dot, and explains how he had them just before I think the spacecraft had been quite a ways out of the Earth's atmosphere, and I think going through some of the more distant going past some of the more distant planets. I think it was just after Saturn. He decided to have them let Voyager take one last glance homeward, to take one picture of Earth. And what resulted from that was this picture now of Earth, and it was just this what he describes as a mosaic of square pixels laid one on top of each other, and a background with more distant stars and planets. But then there was Earth, this little pixel, just this little dot. He called it the pale blue dot. And he explained how insignificant Earth was in relation to the rest of the Earth, the rest of the universe, the rest of all the other galaxies. He explained how, he just showed how this picture demonstrates how Earth is just so insignificant. He called it the pale blue dot. And I'd like to say that, yes, Earth might be insignificant now. Earth might be a nothing compared to what we see in the rest of the universe. But as a result of this plan of salvation, as a result of God coming to this earth, becoming a man like us, living here, dying here, being raised from the dead, and eventually, the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven and being here on earth. Eventually, because of that, Earth will have a more glorified position in the universe than ever before, or than any other place in the entire universe. And truly, it says, as John says in Revelation 21 verse 3, it says, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them, and be their God." And so point number three, this plan puts man and earth in a closer connection with God than we had ever been before. Jesus, the eternal God-man. And so this is the intricate plan of salvation that has been put in motion by God. A plan that was not an afterthought. A plan that brought God down to live where we live. A plan that brought God down to man, to be here where we are, demonstrating his desire to be close with us, setting an example for us, and giving us the help and encouragement that we need to live like he did, to live a life that is like Christ, to live a life that is free from sin. Of course, the struggles that we face, we do often fall into temptation, but God gives us the strength to overcome those temptations and eventually live like Christ lives. A plan that puts us in a closer bond with God than if we had never sinned, and demonstrates to the entire universe the undesirable consequences of choosing a path outside of the will of God. This plan, with all of its well thought through details, ultimately will demonstrate that God is love, and that God is just, and that God's way is the best way. It ensures that sin will never rise up again, and that death and evil will forever be defeated. When this plan reaches its final conclusion, the greatest threat to the perfect humanity, the perfect harmony desired by God, will have been destroyed. Sin will forever be destroyed. Satan will forever be destroyed. And the universe, earth, all of God's created beings will forever live in harmony as a result of this plan being put into motion and being completed. God was not doing damage control. God is not doing damage control. This was something, this evil was something that he saw rising up long before sin ever existed. God definitely knows what he is doing, and in the end, it will have been a success. I want to be a part of that plan, and I hope you want to as well. And I hope that you will work with God in your life as he works in your life to remove sin from your life. I hope that just learning about these different aspects of the plan of salvation, I hope that it has brought to your view, or to you, it has brought confidence to you that God really knows what he is doing, and that it brings to you encouragement to do what God says, to spend time studying his word each day, looking at the life of Christ, and understanding what he wants from us, and knowing that he is providing us the necessary power and strength that we need. So I hope that you will, with me, seek help and strength from God to do what is right in his sight, to be on his side, to defeat this enemy, and to look to Jesus as our example and our friend especially, that we may live lives that are more in accordance with his will, that we may become more and more like him each day. May God bless you as you do that.